The conference room at Federal Aviation Administration headquarters in Washington, D.C., felt colder than the February morning outside. Jasmine Hartford stood before the Accident Investigation Board, her fingers trembling slightly as she held the business class boarding pass from Aero National Airlines Flight 517. 3 days had passed since that flight from Atlanta to Chicago. 3 days since Captain Vincent Harlow told her she didn't belong in business class. 3 days since she was forced to move to coach. The irony burned like acid in her chest. They had no idea the black woman they humiliated was a senior aviation safety inspector with the power to ground their entire operation. Before we dive into what happened on that flight, drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from right now. Are you Team Jasmine, or do you think there's more to this story? Hit that like button if you believe in standing up against injustice. And don't forget to subscribe, because this story is about to take off in ways you won't believe. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. Now let's rewind to where it all began. 3 days earlier, Jasmine's alarm pierced the darkness of her small Atlanta apartment at 5 o'clock in the morning. She silenced it quickly, sitting up in bed and taking a deep breath. Today wasn't just another day. Today she would board Aero National Airlines Flight 517 as an undercover passenger, armed with nothing but her observations and a hidden recording device. At 32 years old, Jasmine had worked for the FAA for 10 years, climbing from entry-level aviation safety inspector to senior inspector through sheer determination and brilliance. Her father had been a military pilot in the 90s, a black man who flew combat missions with distinction but never received the promotions his white colleagues did. She remembered him coming home, shoulders slumped, talking about being passed over again. That injustice planted a seed in young Jasmine's heart. She would change the aviation industry from the inside. She stood before her bathroom mirror, studying her reflection. Her natural afro was cut short and professional. At 5 feet 6 inches, she carried herself with quiet confidence. Today she wore a charcoal gray pantsuit, modest jewelry, and comfortable flats. Nothing flashy, nothing that screamed wealth or status, just a professional woman traveling on business. The FAA had assigned her this undercover mission 2 weeks ago. Aero National Airlines had received 12 formal complaints in the past 6 months. Passengers of color reported discrimination, hostile treatment from flight crews, and suspicious security theater that seemed to target them exclusively. The complaints painted a disturbing pattern, but patterns needed proof. That's where Jasmine came in. She packed her carry-on bag methodically. Laptop, notebook, pens, phone charger, and a small audio recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. Under federal law, she could record interactions on commercial flights as part of her official duties. Everything she witnessed today would become part of the official record. By 7 o'clock, Jasmine arrived at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. The morning rush was building, thousands of travelers streaming through security checkpoints. She had checked in online the night before selecting Seat 3A in business class. The ticket cost $1,247 paid with her personal credit card. The FAA would reimburse her later. The business class check-in area was nearly empty. A young agent with blonde hair smiled professionally, scanning Jasmine's boarding pass without comment. So far, so good. Jasmine proceeded through security, removing her laptop and shoes like everyone else. The TSA agents were courteous and efficient. No problems there either. The business class lounge was exactly what she expected. Plush leather chairs, complimentary coffee and pastries, quiet workspaces with power outlets. Most passengers were white men in expensive suits, tapping away on laptops or speaking into phones about deals and meetings. A few glanced at Jasmine as she entered, their eyes lingering a moment too long before returning to their work. She found a seat near the window and pulled out her tablet, reviewing the inspection checklist. She would observe crew professionalism, passenger treatment, safety protocol compliance, and any signs of discriminatory behavior. The FAA suspected problems went beyond individual bad actors. This might be systemic. At 9:15, the gate agent announced boarding for Flight 517 to Chicago. Business class passengers were invited to board first. Jasmine gathered her bag and joined the priority line. A dozen passengers stood ahead of her, mostly men, all white except for one Asian businessman. She noticed their designer luggage, their Rolex watches, their easy confidence. She belonged here just as much as they did. She had paid the same fare, followed the same rules. Yet, as she approached the gate, she felt the familiar weight of being watched, evaluated, judged. The gate agent, a young black woman named Keisha, scanned Jasmine's boarding pass with a warm smile. "Have a wonderful flight, Miss Hartford." "Thank you," Jasmine replied, appreciating the genuine kindness. She walked down the jet bridge, her heartbeat quickening slightly. This was it. The next 2.5 hours would determine whether Aero National Airlines was guilty of the discrimination passengers had reported. She had no idea just how guilty they were about to prove themselves. The Boeing 737 gleamed under the fluorescent lights of the jet bridge. Jasmine stepped through the aircraft door, immediately hit by the familiar smell of recycled air and cleaning solution. A flight attendant stood just inside, greeting passengers with a practiced smile. Her name tag read Brittany. Brittany's smile flickered when she saw Jasmine. Her eyes dropped to the boarding pass in Jasmine's hand, then back to her face. "Excuse me, miss, are you sure this is your seat?" Jasmine had expected this. She'd been flying long enough to recognize the script. Yes, seat 3, a business class. Brittany reached for the boarding pass, examining it more closely than she had for any passenger ahead of Jasmine. "Let me just verify this." She turned to another flight attendant, a white man in his 30s, and whispered something Jasmine couldn't quite hear. The man glanced at Jasmine, raised his eyebrows slightly, and shrugged. Brittany turned back with a tight smile. "Go ahead." Jasmine moved forward into the business class cabin. 8 rows of spacious leather seats stretched before her, configured 2 by 2 across the aisle. Most were already occupied by passengers settling in, stowing bags, adjusting seats. She found row 3 on the left side and placed her carry-on in the overhead bin. As she slid into seat 3A by the window, she felt eyes on her. Conversations paused. A man across the aisle openly stared. The passenger assigned to seat 3B, a heavy-set white man in his early 50s, wearing an expensive suit, stopped short when he saw her. Marshall Clayton looked at Jasmine, then at his boarding pass, then back at Jasmine. "I think you're in the wrong section, sweetheart." Jasmine turned to face him, her expression neutral. "No, sir. This is my assigned seat." "Are you sure?" Marshall's tone dripped with condescension. "Coach is in the back. Easy mistake to make." "I have a business class ticket," Jasmine said evenly. She pulled out her phone, opening the airline app to show her boarding pass. Seat 3A. Marshall squinted at the screen, clearly disappointed. He grunted something unintelligible and shoved his briefcase under the seat in front of him with more force than necessary. "Unbelievable," he muttered. Jasmine turned away, looking out the window at the tarmac below. She activated the recording device in her pocket with a subtle press of her finger. Everything from this moment forward would be documented. More passengers filed past. A few smiled politely. Most ignored her. One elderly white woman actually stopped and said to Brittany, "Is this the right cabin I paid for business class?" "Yes, ma'am, this is business class," Brittany assured her. The woman looked directly at Jasmine, her meaning crystal clear, before taking her seat 2 rows back. Jasmine made mental notes. Hostile passenger environment. Microaggressions. Questioning of belonging based solely on appearance. She'd document every detail in her official report. 10 minutes before departure, the flight attendant supervisor appeared. Linda Morrison was 45 years old, with meticulously styled blonde hair and a smile that never reached her eyes. She approached Jasmine's row, her gaze fixed on Jasmine alone. "Excuse me, ma'am, can I see your boarding pass?" Jasmine handed it over without comment. Linda studied it far longer than necessary, turning it over as if searching for signs of forgery. "This seems unusual. When did you purchase this ticket?" 3 days ago. Online through the Aero National website." "I see." Linda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Just a moment, please." She walked toward the front of the cabin, pulling out her phone. Jasmine watched in the reflection of the window as Linda made a call, speaking in hushed tones. Though she couldn't hear every word, phrases like "situation" in business class and "need verification" carried back to her seat. Marshall leaned over with a smug expression. "They're on to you. Whatever scam you're running, it's over." Jasmine didn't respond. She simply stared out the window, her jaw tight, her hands clasped in her lap to keep them from shaking with anger. Linda returned her expression grave. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me." Is there a problem with my ticket? Jasmine asked calmly. We just need to verify some information. Please, follow me. Jasmine unbuckled her seatbelt and stood. Every eye in business class tracked her movement. She heard whispers, saw satisfied smirks. They thought she was being removed. They thought she didn't belong. They had no idea who she really was. Linda led Jasmine to a narrow space near the cockpit between business class and the main cabin. The galley area was cramped, with barely enough room for the two of them. Another flight attendant, Derek, stood nearby folding blankets. He looked up with open curiosity. What's going on? Derek asked Linda in a stage whisper clearly meant for Jasmine to hear. That woman in 3A, Linda replied, not bothering to lower her voice. Something's off about her ticket. Derek glanced at Jasmine, his eyes traveling from her face down to her shoes and back up. Probably used someone else's credit card. Happens all the time. Jasmine's recording device captured every word. She stood silently, arms crossed her face, a mask of professional composure, even as rage simmered beneath the surface. Wait here, Linda instructed, as if Jasmine were a child being sent to the principal's office. The cockpit door opened and Captain Vincent Harlow emerged. At 58 years old, he commanded attention simply by existing. 6 feet 3 inches tall, with salt and pepper hair, a square jaw, and the kind of confidence that came from 3 decades of flying. 4 gold stripes adorned each shoulder of his crisp uniform. He was, by every measure, the ultimate authority on this aircraft. His eyes landed on Jasmine and narrowed immediately. What's the problem here? Linda stepped forward. Captain, we have a situation with a passenger in business class. She's seated in 3A, but we're not confident about the validity of her ticket. Vincent's gaze raked over Jasmine with unconcealed disdain. What's your name? Jasmine Hartford. Let me see your boarding pass, Miss Hartford. Jasmine handed it over. Vincent examined it, his frown deepening with each passing second. How did you get this ticket? I purchased it 3 days ago through the Aero National Airlines website using my credit card. You purchased a $1,200 business class ticket. His tone made it clear he didn't believe her. Yes, sir. Vincent's jaw clenched. I find that very hard to believe. Business class tickets cost serious money. How does someone like you afford that? There it was. The phrase that would ultimately cost him everything. Someone like you. Someone like me, Jasmine repeated, her voice steady but cold as ice. What exactly do you mean by that, Captain? Vincent realized his mistake but doubled down anyway. Pride and prejudice rarely make for good bedfellows with wisdom. You know what I mean. This cabin is for business professionals, corporate travelers, not for people who probably should be riding in coach. The galley fell silent. Derek stopped folding blankets. Linda's eyes widened slightly. Even they seemed to understand that Vincent had crossed a line. I am a professional, Jasmine said, each word precise and measured, and I have every right to sit in the seat I purchased legally. Vincent's face flushed red. I don't care what you think your rights are. I'm the captain of this aircraft, and I make the final decisions about passenger seating. You're being moved to economy class. You cannot relocate me based on my race, Jasmine countered. That violates Title VI of the Civil Rights Act and federal aviation regulations. Vincent stepped closer, using his height to intimidate. I'm not moving you based on race. I'm moving you because I suspect ticket fraud. I have the authority to remove any passenger I deem suspicious. You can either accept a coach seat or leave this plane entirely. Those are your only options. Jasmine stood at a crossroads. She could reveal her identity right now, show him her FAA credentials, and watch him backpedal with panicked apologies. But that would end the investigation prematurely. She needed to see how deep this discrimination ran. She needed the full picture. I want to file a formal complaint, she said. Vincent laughed, actually laughed. File whatever you want when we land. Right now, you're going to coach or you're going back to the gate. Choose. Jasmine made her choice. I'll take the coach seat. Smart decision. Linda, relocate Miss Hartford to economy and find her an available seat. Yes, Captain. As Jasmine retrieved her carry-on bag from the overhead bin in business class, she felt the stares of every passenger. Marshall smirked openly. The elderly woman who'd questioned whether this was the right cabin actually smiled. They thought justice had been served. They thought the system had worked properly. They had no idea that justice was about to work very differently than they imagined. The walk from business class to economy felt like a perp walk. Passengers craned their necks to watch Jasmine pass carry-on bag in hand following Linda Morrison to the back of the plane. Whispers followed her like a wake behind a boat. She caught fragments of conversations, each one a small cut. I knew she didn't belong up there. Probably tried to scam her way into business class. They should have just kicked her off entirely. Linda led her all the way to row 25, nearly at the very back of the aircraft. The seat assignment was 25F, a middle seat squeezed between a large man overflowing into the adjacent space and a young mother struggling with a crying infant. "Here you go," Linda said with false brightness. "Enjoy your flight." Jasmine wedged herself into the narrow seat. The difference from business class was jarring and immediate. Where 3A had offered 38 inches of pitch and a width of 21 inches, 25F provided a claustrophobic 30 inches of pitch and barely 17 inches of width. The leather seat of business class had been replaced with thin fabric that smelled faintly of industrial cleaner. No power outlet. No reading light that worked. No privacy. The man to her left was reading a newspaper, his elbow jutting into her space. The mother to her right apologized repeatedly as her baby wailed and flailed tiny fists. Jasmine smiled at her kindly. "It's okay. Babies cry. That's what they do." The mother looked relieved. "Thank you. Some people get so angry." Jasmine settled in, pulling out her small notebook. She began writing everything that had happened, every word spoken, every discriminatory action. The recording device had captured the audio, but her written observations would provide critical context for the official investigation. Now let me pause the story right here and ask you something. If you were in Jasmine's position, would you have revealed your identity right away, or would you have done what she did and continued documenting? Comment the number 1 if you think she made the right call by staying quiet to gather more evidence. And if you're enjoying this story so far, show some love by hitting that like button and subscribing to the channel. You won't believe what happens next when the plane actually takes off. Will Jasmine find even more violations? Will Captain Harlow face consequences? Keep watching to find out. The aircraft door closed at 9:45, 15 minutes behind schedule. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Jasmine watched carefully, noting that the demonstration in economy was rushed compared to what she'd observed in business class. Another small violation of procedure. As the plane pushed back from the gate, a flight attendant she hadn't seen before approached her row. He was young, maybe 28, with dark hair and kind eyes. His name tag identified him as Miguel. "Can I get you anything before takeoff?" Miguel asked quietly. "Just water, please." He returned moments later with a bottle of water and a package of cookies. "These are from business class," he whispered. "You shouldn't have been moved." Jasmine looked up at him sharply. "What do you mean?" Miguel glanced around to make sure no one was listening. "I saw what happened. I've worked for this airline for 4 years, and I've seen Captain Harlow do this before. He has a reputation." "What kind of reputation?" "He's very particular about who he thinks belongs in business class. And it's always passengers of color who mysteriously get moved." Miguel's expression was troubled. "I've reported it twice to management. Nothing ever happens. He's been flying for 30 years, knows all the executives. They protect him." Jasmine's mind raced. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was a pattern, a culture. Has anyone else reported him? At least a dozen passengers that I know of, probably more. But complaints go nowhere. The airline just offers flight vouchers and apologizes. Captain Harlow keeps flying. "What's your full name?" Jasmine asked. Miguel hesitated. "Miguel Santos. But please don't mention me. I need this job. I have a family." "I won't put you at risk," Jasmine promised. "But thank you for telling me." Miguel nodded and moved on to serve other passengers. Jasmine added his information to her notes. A whistleblower flight attendant would be crucial corroboration. The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the air. Atlanta disappeared below, replaced by clouds and then blue sky. Under different circumstances, Jasmine loved this moment. The miracle of flight never got old, even after thousands of flights. Today, though, she felt only cold determination. 1 hour into the flight, turbulence began. Nothing severe, just enough to turn on the seatbelt sign and create gentle bumps. Jasmine looked toward the front of the cabin and froze. The cockpit door was open. Not fully open, but cracked, with Linda Morrison standing in the doorway talking to someone inside. This was a direct violation of Federal Aviation Regulation Part 121.313. After September 11th, cockpit doors were required to remain locked and closed during flight, except for specific controlled entry and exit procedures. Jasmine carefully angled her phone and took several photos, making it look like she was simply checking messages. The images clearly showed the open cockpit door and Linda's casual violation of security protocols. 20 minutes later, with the seatbelt sign still illuminated due to ongoing turbulence, Linda and another flight attendant were chatting loudly near the galley instead of being seated as required. Another violation. Jasmine documented everything. What had started as an investigation into discrimination had expanded to include serious safety violations. The FAA would be very interested in this. Aero National Airlines wasn't just discriminating against passengers of color. They were sloppy with safety, arrogant in their procedures, and apparently immune to consequences. Captain Harlow's voice came over the intercom. "Folks, this is your captain. We're experiencing some light chop as we pass through a weather system. Should clear up in about 15 minutes. Flight attendants, please remain seated." The irony wasn't lost on Jasmine. The captain issuing safety instructions while running a cabin where discrimination and protocol violations were routine practice. The man next to her nudged her arm, trying to get comfortable. "Sorry," he muttered. "Not much room back here." "No, there isn't," Jasmine agreed. "You come from business class?" he asked. Jasmine nodded. "What happened?" "Downgrade." "Something like that." He grunted sympathetically. "Airlines don't care about people like us. They only care about profit and treating the rich folks nice." "People like us." The phrase echoed in her mind. Her seatmate meant it as solidarity, as shared experience of being treated as second class. But it hit differently after what Captain Harlow had said. People who probably should be riding in coach. The turbulence subsided. The seatbelt sign turned off. Jasmine closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Just 40 more minutes until landing. Then the real work would begin. The plane touched down at O'Hare International Airport at 11:15, right on schedule, despite the delayed departure. Jasmine remained in her seat as passengers crowded the aisles, eager to deplane. She had no reason to rush. She knew exactly where she was going and what she was going to do. When the economy cabin finally cleared, Jasmine stood and retrieved her carry-on bag. She walked forward through the now empty business class section. The leather seats looked even more spacious without passengers. Seat 3A. Her seat sat empty by the window. Linda Morrison stood near the exit door, smiling mechanically at departing passengers. "Thank you for flying Aero National. Have a wonderful day." When Jasmine approached, Linda's smile vanished. She looked down, suddenly very interested in her tablet. Jasmine paused. "I will be filing a formal complaint about this flight." Linda glanced up, her expression dismissive. "You're welcome to do that. Complaints can be submitted through our website." "Oh, I'll be doing much more than submitting an online form." Jasmine's tone was pleasant, almost friendly, which made the words more ominous. She stepped off the aircraft into the jet bridge, her mind already planning the next steps. First, file a complaint with Aero National's customer service. Second, call her supervisor at the FAA. Third, prepare a comprehensive report with all evidence. The customer service desk was located near baggage claim. Jasmine approached the counter where a black woman in her mid-30s wearing an Aero National uniform was helping another passenger. When the other passenger left, Jasmine stepped forward. The agent's name tag read Tanya Williams. "Good afternoon. How can I help you?" Tanya asked warmly. "I need to file a formal discrimination complaint about Flight 517 from Atlanta." Tanya's expression shifted immediately to professional concern. I'm very sorry to hear that. Please tell me what happened. Jasmine recounted the entire incident. Brittany's suspicion at boarding, Marshall's comments, Linda's interrogation. Captain Harlow's explicit statement that she belonged in coach, not business class. The forced relocation based solely on the color of her skin. Tanya listened with growing dismay, nodding occasionally, her fingers flying across her keyboard. Miss Hartford, I am so sorry you experienced this. Unfortunately, you're not the first person to complain about Captain Harlow. How many complaints has he received? Tanya hesitated, glancing around before leaning closer. I shouldn't share specific numbers, but it's more than a dozen in the past 2 years. Always the same pattern. Passengers of color in business class being questioned, moved, or removed. And what has the airline done about it? Tanya's expression turned bitter. They issue apologies, offer flight vouchers, and promise internal investigations. But nothing ever changes. Captain Harlow is senior management's golden boy. 30 years of service, spotless safety record, friends in high places. He's untouchable. We'll see about that, Jasmine said quietly. I'm entering your complaint into the system now, Tanya continued. You'll receive a reference number, and someone from our corporate office should contact you within 5 business days. I need to speak with your regional manager. Today. Tanya's eyebrows rose. That would be Douglas Freeman, but he's not usually available for passenger complaints. The normal process is. I don't care about the normal process. This is a federal civil rights violation. I need to speak with him as soon as possible. Something in Jasmine's tone made Tanya take her more seriously. Let me see if he's available. Can I tell him what this is regarding racial discrimination and potential FAA safety violations on Flight 517? Tanya's eyes widened. FAA violations? What kind? Cockpit security protocol breaches and failure to follow seatbelt requirements during turbulence. Oh my God. Tanya picked up her phone immediately. Let me call Mr. Freeman right now. While Tanya made the call, Jasmine stepped aside and pulled out her own phone. She dialed Director Raymond Mitchell at the FAA Atlanta office. He answered on the second ring. Jasmine, how did the inspection go? Sir, it was worse than we anticipated. Much worse. Tell me everything. Jasmine walked to a quiet corner of the terminal and gave Raymond a complete briefing. The discrimination, the forced relocation, Captain Harlow's explicit statements, the cockpit door violation, the flight attendants ignoring seatbelt requirements. She had audio recordings, photographs, witness testimony from Miguel Santos, and documentation of previous complaints against Harlow. Raymond was silent for a long moment after she finished. This is extremely serious, Jasmine. You've documented systemic discrimination and multiple safety violations. We have grounds for immediate action. What do you recommend, sir? Return to Atlanta on the next available flight. I'm convening an emergency review board for tomorrow morning at 0800 hours. Bring all your evidence. We're going to move fast on this before they can cover it up. What about Captain Harlow? He's still flying. I'll issue an emergency temporary suspension of his pilot certificate effective immediately pending investigation. He won't fly another foot until we resolve this. Jasmine felt a surge of satisfaction. Thank you, sir. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly, Jasmine. Aero National is a major carrier with expensive lawyers and political connections. They're going to fight back hard. I'm ready. I know you are. That's why I chose you for this assignment. See you tomorrow morning. Jasmine ended the call and returned to the customer service desk. Tanya looked up, her expression troubled. I couldn't reach Mr. Freeman directly, but I left an urgent message with his assistant. Your complaint has been logged with priority status. Here's your reference number. She handed Jasmine a printed document. Thank you, Tanya. You've been very helpful. Miss Hartford, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you going to actually do something about this? Because I've seen so many passengers complain and nothing ever happens. People like Captain Harlow just keep doing what they've always done. Jasmine met her eyes. Something is going to happen. I promise you that. Tanya searched her face, then nodded slowly. I hope so. I really do. Jasmine booked a seat on the next flight back to Atlanta, departing in 3 hours. She found a quiet spot in the terminal, ordered coffee, and began organizing her evidence. Photos, audio files, written notes, witness information. Everything needed to be documented properly for the review board. Her phone buzzed with a text from her father. "How's Chicago? Hope the work trip is going well." She smiled sadly and typed back, "It's going. I'll tell you all about it when I get home. Love you, Dad." She thought about her father's experiences, the discrimination he'd endured, the promotions he'd been denied, the dignity he'd fought to maintain in a system designed to diminish him. This wasn't just about her anymore. This was about every person of color who'd ever been told they didn't belong. Every passenger who'd been humiliated, questioned, relocated because someone in authority decided their skin color meant they must be in the wrong place. Captain Vincent Harlow was about to learn a very expensive lesson. The woman he dismissed as someone who belonged in coach was about to ground his career permanently. Just as Jasmine thought sometimes wears a pantsuit and flies economy. But it always eventually lands. The FAA conference room in Atlanta was exactly as Jasmine remembered it. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a long table surrounded by office chairs. At 8 o'clock the next morning, she sat at that table facing Director Raymond Mitchell, 3 other senior aviation safety inspectors, and Amanda Chen, the FAA's regional legal counsel. Raymond opened the meeting. "Inspector Hartford, please present your findings from the undercover inspection of Aero National Airlines Flight 517. Jasmine stood, connected her laptop to the projector, and began her presentation. She walked them through the timeline, starting with boarding and ending with landing. She played the audio recording of Captain Harlow's statement, "This cabin is for business professionals, not for people who probably should be riding in coach." The room fell silent as Harlow's voice filled the space. The contempt in his tone was unmistakable. She showed the photographs of the open cockpit door, the timestamps proving flight attendants violated seatbelt procedures during turbulence. She presented Tanya Williams' documentation of previous complaints against Harlow, 12 in total over 2 years, all from passengers of color. When she finished, Amanda Chen spoke first. "Inspector Hartford, this is ironclad. We have clear Title VI civil rights violations, FAR, Part 121 violations regarding cockpit security and evidence of systemic discrimination. We have grounds for immediate enforcement action." One of the other inspectors, Marcus Webb, leaned forward. "How do you want to proceed, Director?" Raymond steepled his fingers. "We issue an emergency order of suspension for Captain Harlow's pilot certificate, effective immediately. We initiate a comprehensive inspection of Aero National Airlines' entire operation, focusing on discrimination training, safety culture, and complaint handling procedures. And we prepare a referral to the Department of Justice for potential criminal civil rights violations." "Agreed," Amanda said. "I'll draft the legal documents this morning. We should also notify Aero National's CEO directly. They need to know this is serious." "I'll make that call," Raymond said. "Jasmine, outstanding work. This is exactly the kind of evidence we needed." 2 hours later, Raymond placed the call to Aero National Airlines CEO Gerald Whitmore. Jasmine sat in his office listening on speakerphone. "Mr. Whitmore, this is Director Raymond Mitchell from the FAA Flight Standards District Office in Atlanta." Gerald Whitmore's voice was smooth, confident. "Director Mitchell, what can I do for you? We've completed an undercover inspection of your Flight 517 from Atlanta to Chicago 3 days ago. We found serious violations." "What kind of violations?" The confidence wavered slightly. "Racial discrimination by Captain Vincent Harlow against a paying passenger, coupled with multiple safety protocol breaches, including cockpit security violations." Silence. Then, carefully, "Those are very serious allegations. Do you have proof?" Full audio and video documentation from a senior FAA inspector who was on board as an undercover passenger, the same passenger your captain discriminated against. More silence. Jasmine could almost hear Whitmore's mind racing. "I see. What action is the FAA taking?" "Immediate emergency suspension of Captain Harlow's pilot certificate pending investigation. We're also launching a comprehensive audit of your entire operation. You'll receive formal notice by end of business today." "Director Mitchell, I think you may be overreaching. Captain Harlow is one of our most experienced pilots, with an exemplary safety record spanning 30 years. I'm certain this is simply a misunderstanding." Raymond's expression hardened. It's not a misunderstanding when we have recorded audio of him telling a black woman she doesn't belong in business class because people like her should be in coach. We'll conduct our own internal investigation, of course. Aero National takes these matters very seriously. I'm sure you do, Mr. Whitmore. But the FAA investigation will proceed independently. Expect our audit team next week. Director, I feel I should mention that I have close relationships with several members of the Senate Commerce Committee. This could become very complicated for everyone involved. Jasmine's eyes widened. Was he actually threatening the FAA? Raymond's voice turned to ice. Mr. Whitmore, are you threatening federal aviation safety inspectors in the course of their official duties? A pause. Of course not. I'm simply pointing out the reality of the situation. The reality, Mr. Whitmore, is that your airline violated federal civil rights law and aviation safety regulations. No amount of political connections will change that. Good day. Raymond ended the call and looked at Jasmine. Well, that went exactly as badly as I expected. He threatened you. He tried to. These airline executives think they're above accountability. They're about to learn otherwise. Within 2 hours, Gerald Whitmore's response arrived. Not through official channels, but through the media. Aero National Airlines released a statement to every major news outlet. Aero National Airlines categorically denies all allegations of discrimination. We believe these accusations are part of a coordinated effort to damage our reputation. Captain Vincent Harlow is a decorated pilot with 3 decades of unblemished service. We stand behind him completely and will vigorously defend against these baseless charges. By noon, Captain Harlow himself held a press conference. Jasmine watched it on the television in the FAA break room, her stomach churning. Harlow stood before a bank of microphones, looking dignified and wounded. I've dedicated my life to aviation safety and passenger service. I have never in 30 years discriminated against anyone based on race. On the flight in question, I had legitimate security concerns about a passenger whose behavior seemed suspicious. I followed protocol to ensure the safety of everyone on board. Now, I'm being accused of racism by someone with an agenda. This is cancel culture at its worst, and I won't stand for it. The reporters ate it up. Questions came rapid fire. Captain Harlow, what specifically made the passenger seem suspicious? Did the FAA inspector identify herself? Do you feel you're being targeted? Harlow answered each question with practiced sincerity, portraying himself as a dedicated professional being persecuted for doing his job. Marcus Webb, watching beside Jasmine, shook his head. He's good. I'll give him that. He's a liar, Jasmine said flatly. Yeah, but he's a convincing liar. This is going to be a fight. And it was. Over the next 48 hours, the story exploded across national media. Conservative outlets championed Harlow as a victim of political correctness run amok. Liberal outlets condemned the discrimination. Social media erupted into warring camps. Jasmine's phone rang constantly. Reporters wanted interviews. Random strangers somehow got her number and left messages ranging from supportive to viciously racist. Someone found her address and sent hate mail. One envelope contained a note that read, "You should have stayed in your place." She changed her number and stayed with a friend for a few days while the initial frenzy died down. But the pressure was immense. Aero National hired a team of expensive lawyers who filed motions challenging the FAA's authority, questioning Jasmine's credibility, and demanding access to all evidence. Gerald Whitmore appeared on financial news networks portraying Aero National as the victim of regulatory overreach. This administration wants to destroy successful American companies with baseless accusations. We will fight this in court and in the court of public opinion. 1 week after the incident, Jasmine sat in her apartment watching the news, feeling overwhelmed. Her phone buzzed. It was Raymond. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better, sir. I know this is hard, but don't let them shake you. We have the evidence. Truth matters." Does it? Half the country thinks I'm lying. The other half thinks I'm a hero. Nobody actually knows me. I know you. You're one of the best inspectors I've ever worked with. You did everything right. Don't doubt that. Jasmine took a deep breath. What's next? Formal hearing in 2 weeks. Harlow's license suspension, the airline's audit findings. Everything gets reviewed by an administrative law judge. It's going to be intense. I'm ready. I know you are. Jasmine, one more thing. You're not alone in this. The entire FAA stands behind you. After they hung up, Jasmine walked to her window and looked out at Atlanta's skyline. Somewhere out there, Captain Harlow was probably sleeping peacefully, confident in his privilege and connections. Somewhere, Gerald Whitmore was strategizing with lawyers about how to destroy her credibility. But Jasmine had something they didn't have. She had the truth. And she had a recording device that captured every damning word. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks later, the FAA Administrative Hearing Room in Washington, D.C. felt like a courtroom because in every meaningful way, it was one. Administrative Law Judge Patricia Brooks presided from an elevated bench, her expression neutral and unreadable. At 58 years old, Judge Brooks had a reputation for fairness and an intolerance for nonsense. Jasmine sat at one table with Amanda Chen and Raymond Mitchell. Across the aisle, Captain Vincent Harlow sat with 3 attorneys from one of Washington's most expensive law firms. Behind them, representatives from Aero National Airlines filled the gallery seats. The media wasn't allowed inside, but dozens of reporters waited outside the building. Judge Brooks gavelled the hearing to order. We're here to review the emergency order of suspension issued against Captain Vincent Harlow's pilot certificate and to examine allegations of civil rights violations and safety protocol breaches on Aero National Airlines Flight 517. Inspector Hartford, you may present your testimony. Jasmine stood and walked to the witness stand. She raised her right hand and swore to tell the truth. Amanda Chen conducted the examination. Inspector Hartford, please describe the events of November 18th on Aero National Flight 517. Jasmine had rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, but speaking it aloud in this formal setting carried different weight. She walked through every detail. Boarding the aircraft, Brittany's suspicion, Marshal Clayton's comments, Linda Morrison's interrogation, and finally, Captain Harlow's confrontation. What specifically did Captain Harlow say to you? Amanda asked. He said, and I quote, "This cabin is for business professionals, not for people who probably should be riding in coach." And you recorded this statement. Yes. Amanda played the audio recording. Harlow's voice filled the hearing room, every word crystal clear. The contempt in his tone was unmistakable. This cabin is for business professionals, not for people who probably should be riding in coach. When the recording ended, Judge Brooks leaned forward. Captain Harlow, you're heard making these statements. Do you dispute the authenticity of this recording? One of Harlow's attorneys stood. Your Honor, we do not dispute the recording's authenticity, but we dispute Inspector Hartford's interpretation of our client's words. How so? Captain Harlow was referring to passengers who might be traveling on discounted or suspicious tickets, not making any racial distinction. Judge Brooks looked skeptical. The recording seems quite clear about the implication. Amanda Chen stood again. Your Honor, we have additional evidence. 12 formal complaints filed against Captain Harlow over the past 2 years, all from passengers of color, all describing similar treatment. This establishes a pattern of discriminatory behavior. She submitted the complaints into evidence. Judge Brooks spent 10 minutes reviewing them, her expression growing increasingly stern. These are disturbing, she said finally. Captain Harlow, can you explain why you have 12 complaints alleging racial discrimination, all following the same pattern? Harlow's lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Thomas Westfield, rose. Your Honor, Captain Harlow has flown over 12,000 flights in his career, transporting more than 2 million passengers. 12 complaints over 2 years represents 0.006% of his passenger interactions. These are statistically insignificant. Statistically insignificant to you, perhaps, Judge Brooks replied, but quite significant to the passengers who were discriminated against. What about the safety violations? Inspector Hartford, please describe what you observed regarding cockpit security. Jasmine presented the photographs showing the cockpit door open during flight, Linda Morrison standing in the doorway. She explained the violation of FAR Part 121.313. This regulation was implemented after September 11th to prevent unauthorized access to the cockpit. Leaving the door open even briefly compromises security. Westfield objected. The door was open for less than 30 seconds while the flight attendant communicated with the pilots about a passenger issue. This is standard practice and poses no real security threat. Standard practice, Amanda Chen countered. The regulation doesn't have an exception for standard practice. It requires the cockpit door to remain locked and closed. Period. Judge Brooks made notes. What about the seatbelt violation? Jasmine described watching Linda Morrison and another flight attendant chatting in the galley during turbulence while the seatbelt sign was illuminated instead of being seated as required. Westfield waved dismissively. Minor protocol deviations that happen on thousands of flights daily. This is cherry-picking insignificant details to build a false narrative. Judge Brooks fixed him with a stern look. Mr. Westfield, I'll determine what's significant and what's not. Please continue, Inspector Hartford. The examination continued for 2 more hours. Jasmine presented witness testimony from Miguel Santos, who had been granted whistleblower protection by the FAA. Miguel described Harlow's reputation among flight attendants, the previous incidents he'd witnessed, and the culture of impunity at Aero National. When it was Harlow's turn to testify, he maintained his innocence throughout. Inspector Hartford appeared nervous and out of place, he said. In my professional judgment, her behavior warranted additional scrutiny. When I asked about her ticket, she became defensive. I made a decision in the interest of flight safety and passenger comfort. Captain Harlow, Judge Brooks interrupted. What specifically about Inspector Hartford's appearance or behavior suggested she was out of place in business class? Harlow hesitated. This was the trap. If he said she dressed inappropriately, the photographs would contradict him. If he said her behavior was suspicious, the testimony of other passengers would refute it. If he mentioned anything related to race, he'd confirm the discrimination. She just seemed not like our typical business class passengers. In what way? I can't put my finger on it exactly. It was an instinct developed over 30 years of flying. An instinct, Judge Brooks repeated dryly. And this instinct has led to 12 complaints from passengers of color over 2 years. Those complaints are taken out of context. I see. Judge Brooks made more notes. Westfield tried to salvage the testimony. Your Honor, we contend that Inspector Hartford engaged in entrapment. She deliberately presented herself in a manner designed to provoke a response, then used her position to manufacture a case against Captain Harlow. Amanda Chen shot to her feet. Objection! Inspector Hartford was conducting a lawful undercover investigation based on previous complaints against Aero National Airlines. There was no entrapment. She simply existed as a black woman with a business class ticket, and that was apparently enough for Captain Harlow to decide she didn't belong. The hearing room buzzed with murmurs. Judge Brooks gavelled for silence. Mr. Westfield, unless you have evidence that Inspector Hartford did anything to provoke this incident beyond purchasing a ticket and boarding the aircraft, I'm going to sustain Miss Chen's objection. We maintain that her presence itself was provocative given the investigation. So her mere presence as a black woman in business class was provocative. Judge Brooks's tone could have frozen water. Is that your argument? Westfield realized his mistake. That's not what I meant. Then please clarify what you did mean. Westfield stammered through a response that only made things worse. Jasmine watched him flounder, feeling no satisfaction, only tired vindication. After 6 hours of testimony, Judge Brooks called for a recess. I'll issue my ruling tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. This hearing is adjourned. Outside the building, reporters swarmed both sides. Jasmine and the FAA team declined comment. Harlow's attorneys gave a statement declaring their client's innocence and confidence in ultimate vindication. That night, Jasmine couldn't sleep. She lay in her hotel room staring at the ceiling, replaying the hearing in her mind. Had she done enough? Would justice prevail? At 9 o'clock the next morning, they reconvened. Judge Brooks entered carrying a thick document. I've reviewed all evidence, testimony, and applicable regulations. My ruling is as follows. The room held its collective breath. Captain Vincent Harlow engaged in clear, unambiguous racial discrimination against Inspector Jasmine Hartford. His statements captured on audio recording demonstrate explicit bias. The pattern of complaints against him over 2 years establishes that this was not an isolated incident, but rather a consistent practice. Additionally, the safety violations observed on Flight 517 reflect a broader culture of carelessness at Aeronational Airlines. Harlow's face went pale. Therefore, I uphold the emergency order of suspension and make it permanent. Captain Harlow's pilot certificate is hereby revoked. Furthermore, I am recommending that the FAA impose a civil penalty of $500,000 against Aeronational Airlines and require comprehensive anti-discrimination training for all personnel. Westfield stood. Your Honor, we intend to appeal this decision. That's your right, Mr. Westfield, but the revocation stands pending any appeal. Captain Harlow, you are grounded. This hearing is concluded. The gavel fell with the finality of thunder. The ruling made national news within minutes. FAA permanently revokes pilot license after discrimination against black inspector screamed the headlines. Cable news networks led with the story. Social media exploded. Jasmine returned to Atlanta that afternoon and went straight to FAA headquarters, where Raymond and the entire office staff greeted her with applause. Someone had bought a cake that read, "Justice served." "You did it," Raymond said, shaking her hand. "You changed the industry." "We did it," Jasmine corrected. This was a team effort. But the victory celebration was premature. Within hours, Aeronational's board of directors held an emergency meeting. The next morning, they announced that CEO Gerald Whitmore had been forced to resign. "The board has lost confidence in Mr. Whitmore's leadership," the statement read. "We are committed to reforming our corporate culture and ensuring that discrimination has no place at Aeronational Airlines." The new CEO was Lorraine Carter, a 52-year-old black woman who had served as chief operating officer at Delta Airlines. Her first press conference was blunt. What happened to Inspector Hartford was unacceptable. What happened to the 12 passengers who complained before her was unacceptable. This company has failed its basic obligation to treat all passengers with dignity and respect. That ends now. She announced immediate changes. Mandatory anti-discrimination training for all employees. An independent hotline for passengers to report discrimination directly to an outside ombudsman. Diversity targets for hiring and promotion. And a personal apology to Jasmine Hartford. "Ms. Hartford, on behalf of Aeronational Airlines, I apologize. We failed you. We will do better." The airline also offered financial compensation. Jasmine refused the money but asked that it be donated to a scholarship fund for students of color pursuing careers in aviation. Aeronational agreed and added an additional $2 million to create the Jasmine Hartford Aviation Equity Scholarship. The FAA, meanwhile, used the case to implement industry-wide reforms. Every commercial airline in America was now required to conduct annual anti-discrimination training. A new regulation required airlines to report all discrimination complaints to the FAA quarterly, and a whistleblower protection program was established for airline employees to report discrimination without fear of retaliation. Miguel Santos, the flight attendant who had quietly supported Jasmine, was promoted to lead flight attendant and became an advocate for fair treatment policies within the airline industry. Vincent Harlow, stripped of his pilot certificate and facing potential criminal civil rights charges, faded from public view. His attorneys eventually negotiated a settlement where he agreed to never work in commercial aviation again and to pay a personal fine of $50,000. Jasmine received letters from around the country. Passengers who had experienced discrimination thanked her for giving them a voice. Young black students interested in aviation told her she was their inspiration. Parents said their children now believed they could be pilots or inspectors or any role in aerospace. One letter particularly moved her. It was from a 68-year-old black woman named Dorothy Green. "Dear Miss Hartford, in 1973, I was removed from a first-class seat on a flight from New York to Los Angeles. The captain said I must have stolen my ticket because colored girls couldn't afford first class. I complained to the airline, but nothing happened. For 50 years, I carried that shame and anger. Then I saw your story. Thank you for finishing what I started. Thank you for proving that we do belong. We always belonged, and no one can tell us otherwise." Jasmine framed that letter and hung it in her office. 3 months after the hearing, Jasmine was promoted to regional administrator for the FAA Southeast region. At 32, she was the youngest person ever to hold the position, and the first black woman. Her responsibilities now included oversight of all commercial aviation operations in 6 states. Her father attended the promotion ceremony wearing his old Air Force uniform. Afterward, he hugged her tight. "I'm so proud of you, Jasmine. You did what I couldn't do. You changed the system. I did it for you, Dad. For you and everyone who was told they didn't belong." The aviation industry slowly but surely began to change. Airlines diversified their hiring. Flight crews became more representative of America's diversity. Passenger complaints of discrimination dropped significantly, though they didn't disappear entirely. Jasmine knew the fight wasn't over. Systemic racism doesn't die with one court ruling. But she also knew that progress happens one case at a time, one victory at a time, one person willing to stand up at a time. She thought about that morning in business class seat 3A when Captain Harlow told her she belonged in coach. He thought he was putting her in her place. Instead, he had awakened a force that would reshape an entire industry. Sometimes, justice takes a long time. Sometimes, it requires sacrifice and risk. But when it finally arrives, it's worth every moment of the fight. 6 months after Judge Brooks's ruling, Jasmine found herself back at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport. This time she was traveling to Los Angeles for a national aviation safety conference, where she would deliver the keynote address on equity and safety in commercial aviation. She had booked business class on an Aero National flight. Some colleagues thought this was tempting fate, but Jasmine saw it differently. The only way to know if change was real was to test it. The airport felt different now. Large posters throughout the terminal featured diverse passengers and crew members with the slogan, "All passengers deserve respect." Aero National's rebranding campaign was hard to miss. At the gate, Jasmine watched the boarding process. The agent smiled warmly at everyone. A young black man in a business suit boarded with his first-class ticket, and no one questioned him. An elderly Latina woman with a business-class boarding pass received the same courteous treatment as the white executives around her. When Jasmine's boarding group was called, she walked down the jet bridge with a strange mix of emotions: anticipation, caution, hope. The flight attendant at the door was a young black woman whose name tag read Kennedy. She smiled genuinely when she saw Jasmine's boarding pass. "Welcome aboard, Miss Hartford. Business class seat 3A. That's window seat on the left side, 3rd row." "Thank you," Jasmine said, noting the lack of suspicion, the absence of questions. She walked into the business class cabin. The leather seats gleamed. Passengers were settling in, stowing bags, getting comfortable. No one looked at her with suspicion. No one questioned whether she belonged. Seat 3A was exactly as she remembered, window seat 3rd row left side. The same seat Captain Harlow had forced her to leave 6 months ago. Jasmine placed her carry-on in the overhead bin and sat down. The leather was soft. The legroom was generous. Everything was as it should be. A flight attendant approached a Latino man in his 40s. "Can I get you anything before takeoff? Miss Hartford, water coffee." "Just water, please." He returned with bottled water and a warm smile. "We're honored to have you flying with us today." Jasmine was surprised. "You know who I am. Everyone in this company knows who you are. You changed us for the better. Thank you." Before Jasmine could respond, the captain's voice came over the intercom. "Good morning, passengers. This is Captain Alicia Thompson. On behalf of First Officer Marcus Chen and the entire crew, welcome aboard Aero National Flight 723 to Los Angeles." Jasmine's breath caught. Captain Alicia Thompson, a black woman flying commercial jets for Aero National. This would have been unthinkable 6 months ago. "Weather looks great today," Captain Thompson continued. "We'll be cruising at 39,000 feet with an estimated flight time of 4 hours and 20 minutes. We're honored to serve you and committed to making this a safe, comfortable, and respectful journey for every passenger on board." Respectful. That word, emphasized slightly, carried weight. The plane pushed back from the gate on time. As they taxied to the runway, Jasmine looked out the window at the Atlanta skyline. This city had been home to so much of the civil rights movement. Now, decades later, the fight continued in different forms in different places. In airports, on airplanes, in corporate boardrooms and federal hearing rooms. A woman in the seat across the aisle leaned over. She was black, probably in her early 40s, dressed in business attire. "Excuse me, are you Jasmine Hartford, the FAA inspector?" Jasmine nodded. "Yes, I am." The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Thank you. My daughter is 15 years old. She wants to be a pilot. Before your case, I didn't think it was possible for her. Now, she believes she can do anything. You changed her life. You changed our lives." Jasmine felt her own eyes sting. "What's your daughter's name?" "Maya. Tell Maya that she can absolutely be a pilot. Tell her the sky isn't the limit anymore. There are no limits." The woman wiped her eyes and nodded. "I will. Thank you." The plane accelerated down the runway and lifted smoothly into the air. Atlanta fell away below, replaced by clouds, and then brilliant blue sky. Jasmine closed her eyes and thought about everything that had happened. She thought about Captain Harlow now working as a consultant in some unrelated industry, his flying days over. She thought about Gerald Whitmore forced into retirement, his legacy tarnished. She thought about the passengers who had suffered discrimination before her and found no justice. But mostly she thought about the future, about Maya and the thousands of other young people of color who now saw aviation as a field where they belonged, about the flight attendants who no longer had to tolerate discriminatory behavior from pilots, about the passengers who could board planes without fearing they'd be questioned, moved, or humiliated based on their skin color. Change was slow. Change was hard. But change was possible. The flight attendant, Kennedy, stopped by Jasmine's seat. "Miss Hartford, Captain Thompson asked if you'd like to visit the cockpit after we reach cruising altitude." Jasmine smiled. 6 months ago, she'd been thrown out of business class. Now the captain was inviting her to the cockpit. "I'd be honored." 30 minutes later, Jasmine stood in the cockpit doorway. Captain Thompson turned and smiled, her hands steady on the controls. "Inspector Hartford, welcome. Thank you for everything you did." "Thank you for being here," Jasmine replied. "You're inspiring the next generation." "We're all inspiring the next generation," Captain Thompson said. "Every time we show up, every time we do our jobs with excellence, every time we refuse to accept being told we don't belong. That's how change happens." Jasmine returned to her seat as the plane flew west toward California. She pulled out her laptop and began reviewing her keynote speech. The title was "Belonging, Safety, and Equity in Modern Aviation." She would tell her story to the conference. She would share the lessons learned. She would challenge the industry to do better. And she would remind everyone that safety and equity were not competing values, but complementary ones. An industry that discriminated against passengers or employees was an industry with flawed judgment. An industry with flawed judgment was an unsafe industry. The plane soared through clear skies. Jasmine looked out at the clouds below, thinking about Seat 3A, about business class, and coach, about who gets to decide where people belong. Captain Vincent Harlow had tried to put her in her place. Instead, she had found her purpose. And in doing so, she had changed an entire industry, opened doors for countless others, and proved that one person standing up for what's right can move mountains. Or in this case, move airlines. So here's my question for you. Have you ever experienced discrimination, whether on a plane, in a restaurant, at work, or anywhere else? How did you handle it? Drop your story in the comments below. And if you believe that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect regardless of their race, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to this channel if you want more stories about people who stood up against injustice and won. Share this video with someone who needs to hear that they belong, that they matter, that their voice counts. Thank you for watching Jasmine's incredible journey. Remember, you never know who's sitting next to you on a plane. That person you're tempted to judge or dismiss might be the very person with the power to change your world. Treat everyone with respect. Stand up against discrimination, and never ever tell someone they don't belong. Until next time, keep fighting the good fight. Keep standing up for what's right. And remember that justice, even when delayed, is always worth pursuing. Safe travels, everyone. Jasmine Hartford's story teaches us profound truths about courage, justice, and systemic change. First, documentation matters. Without her audio recordings, photographs, and meticulous notes, Captain Harlow might have escaped accountability as he had 12 times before. Evidence transforms personal experience into irrefutable truth. Second, individual actions can trigger systemic reform. One woman's refusal to accept discrimination led to industry-wide policy changes affecting millions of passengers. Third, privilege often blinds those who possess it. Captain Harlow never imagined the woman he dismissed held power to end his career because his worldview couldn't accommodate that possibility. Fourth, institutions protect themselves until forced to change. Aero National Airlines ignored complaints for years until public exposure and legal consequences made reform inevitable. Fifth, representation matters enormously. Captain Alicia Thompson flying commercial jets and young Maya dreaming of becoming a pilot represent tangible results of Jasmine's courage. Sixth, justice requires allies. Director Mitchell, Attorney Chen Miguel Santos, and countless others supported Jasmine when she stood alone. Finally, the fight against discrimination never truly ends. It requires constant vigilance, brave individuals willing to speak truth to power, and systems designed to protect the vulnerable rather than the powerful. Jasmine didn't just win her case. She dismantled barriers, opened doors, and proved that belonging isn't granted by those in authority, but claimed by those with courage. What would you have done in Jasmine's position? Would you have revealed your identity immediately or gathered evidence like she did? Drop the number 1 in the comments if you think she made the right choice. Have you or someone you know experienced discrimination while traveling? Share your story below because your voice matters and others need to hear they're not alone. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories about ordinary people who stood up against injustice and changed the world. Ring that notification bell so you never miss an upload. And please, share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that they belong, that they matter, and that standing up for what's right always makes a difference. Thank you for taking this journey with Jasmine Hartford. Remember, respect costs nothing but means everything. Treat people with dignity regardless of their race, background, or circumstances. Stand up when you witness injustice. Be the change you want to see. Until next time, stay strong, stay courageous, and never stop fighting for equality. Safe travels, everyone, and may you always find your seat at the table you deserve.